Hi there, welcome to Light from Above. My name is David Kenney. Today on our show, we're going to talk about a touchy subject. I really don't know much of a more touchy subject than it comes to this subject, and that is money. Giving money as a form of worship. You know, when I sometimes wait at the table, part of our worship is we take these plates and we pass them around and people put money in them, and I try to be very careful and make sure I avoid looking at what people give. I mean, this is a decision they make between them and God. Based on, I try not to look. I really try not to do that. I don't want people thinking that I'm judging them or I'm making assessments of them based on, I really try to avoid that because money is a very sensitive subject to people, and I recognize that. There was a very popular preacher one time. He did a lot of talking about money and giving. He was able to set up a $100,000 fund to train preachers where I went to college at Freed-Hardeman University. He donated $100,000 to Faulkner University from the sale of his books. And a congregation was going to have a man by the name of, this is Vanderbilt Piermont Black. They were going to have him come and do a workshop or a seminar or whatever you call it on the importance of stewardship and giving. And one of the men was so upset about it. He didn't want to have him. And when Brother Black came in, the man left. And when Brother Black left, the man came back in. George Benson, he's a former president of Harding, said of Black, VP Black has taught more people to give liberally of their means than any man living. Well, let me show you a picture of him. And maybe the man didn't want to hear this kind of a statement from Brother Black. This is what he says. Teaching on the subject of giving has been so neglected in the church that we have let the world go unevangelized. We have the wealth, preachers, and modern communication to evangelize the world. In all probability, the average member is not giving 1/2 or even 1/3 of what he ought to be giving to the Lord's cause. Even though these conditions exist, very few seem to be concerned with the seriousness of the matter. Now, we're talking about giving as an act of worship, as a part of worship. And God has always expected us to give. Now, it's interesting that God gives us so much. And the attitudes that people have sometimes about it is, to me, rather frightful. Very ungrateful. And that's something that, we need to consider. But in this lesson, I'm going to look at, 3 main points. And we're going to look at 3 Old Testament examples about giving. We're going to look at the construction of the tabernacle. David constructs an altar, and also the kingdom of Judah fails. We're going to look at those 3 examples. Now, the first one we're going to look at is the construction of the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle, the Israelites were given the opportunity to give precious metals and materials in order to build the tabernacle. This is in Exodus 35. Now, where did they get the money? They spent time in slavery in the Egyptians. Where did they get all this money from? Did the Lord expect them to give of what they didn't have? No, He provided. He provided for them. In Exodus 3:22, God provided for them when He brought the plagues upon Egypt, and he told them, go and ask of your neighbor. And they were given the Israelites jewelry and money and precious money. They were giving them anything that they were asking. They wanted them people out of there. At one point in time with the plagues, the people said, get these people out of here before we all die. So God made provisions for them to have all this material abundance. And so He expects them to give. Now notice it says here in Exodus 35:5, whoever is of a willing heart, let him bring it as an offering to the Lord. Notice that word, willing heart. Now, you wonder, that's sort of brief. Sometimes you have big fundraisers and fund drives, and you have all this entertainment and all these kinds of things to get people to, send money in, and like for muscular dystrophy or other good causes. It's not a comment on the cause. But how do people really have to have all that to have a willing heart? Well, how did they respond in Exodus? Well, look here in Exodus 36, verses 2 through 5, the passage here. Then Moses called Bezalel and Aholiab, and every gifted artisan in whose heart the Lord had put wisdom, everyone whose heart was stirred to come and do the work. And they received from Moses all the offering which the children of Israel had brought for the work of the service of making the sanctuary. So they continued bringing to him freewill offerings every morning. Then all the craftsmen who were doing all the work of the sanctuary came, each from the work he was doing, and they spoke to Moses, saying, the people bring much more than enough for the service of the work which the Lord commanded us to do. Notice that they were giving too much. And the people that are, responsible for this money coming in and to build the tabernacle, they go to Moses and saying, you know what, they're giving too much. We need to stop this. Because we're going to be just inundated with all these funds and we don't, materials and all that. And you might think, well, for a little project like the tabernacle, I could see that happening. But what if it's a big project? Sometimes people say that. Well, I did some analysis. I did a series on Exodus not too long ago. And I went through and I had to make some assumptions to weights and measures and also currency rates, precious metal rates, and all that. And, I tried to be pretty conservative about it. And I took the metals that are mentioned and I tried to come up with a market-based rate of how much they are per ounce or whatever, and how much weight is actually there. Now, just the metals, and there was a lot more they gave. They were giving more than just metals, jewelry and things like that. They were giving animal skins, clothing, all kinds of things were being given. But just the metals alone, calculated up, it exceeded $40 million. $40 million is how much it'd be worth in today's dollars. The tabernacle wasn't just some little project. Now, let me ask you some questions about us. Are our hearts committed to the Lord's work? Are our commitments aligned with our giving? Should congregations have to beg for funds from the membership? Should they have to do that? Do we have willing hearts or unwilling ones? When you look at the Israelites back then, they saw firsthand the blessings that God, they wouldn't be there where they're at if it wasn't for God. We've been so blessed as Christians. I hope none of us have an unwilling heart. That would be a shame. If we go on to the next example, this is David constructs an altar. Now there are two accounts of the events I'm talking about here. This is 2 Samuel 24 and 1 Chronicles 21. Now the events leading up to it, Satan motivates David to conduct a census, 1 Chronicles 21, 1 through 2. The incident occurred because the Lord was angry with the people and he allowed Satan to do this, 2 Samuel 24, 1 through 2. So you read these two accounts. You get sort of a different viewpoint of the situation, or another viewpoint. Taking the census in the manner which David did was a violation of the law of Moses. What he did was against the law. Now he was king, but it was against the law. That's something that, churches need to pay attention to. Just because an eldership gets together and they say, oh, you know what, we know what the New Testament says, but we're going to do this instead. That's a violation of the law. You're not allowed to do it. You got to follow the New Testament plan. Well, in Exodus 30, verse 12, David had violated the law in doing that census. Joab tries to get David to see the foolishness of the census, and that's 2 Samuel 24, 2 through 3, and 1 Chronicles 21, 3 through 4. But David is determined he is going to take this census regardless of what the law of Moses says. But Joab's trying to talk about it. He goes and he does it, but he didn't count everybody. Joab didn't. And you can almost sort of get the sense, at least I do, that he really didn't want to do this. Joab didn't. He thought it was foolish to do it. Not to mention it was, against the law. But he thought it was a waste of time, a waste of resources. So he counted everybody but the Benjamites and the Levites, 1 Chronicles 21, 5 through 6. Now the Lord is very displeased with David. he's displeased both with the nation and with David at this time. And so he tells David to select one of three punishments. One is 7 years of famine. Another one's 3 months of pursuit by your enemies. Or the third one, 3 days of the plague. Now, David decides on the 3 days of the plague. And this is what he said about it, 2 Samuel 24:14. I am in great distress. Please let us fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great. But do not let me fall into the hands of man. And because of this sin, now again, David's the problem. He's the one that violated the law, but the people, they had their problem too. But because of that, some 70,000 men died. The text says that the Lord sent an angel and he killed these people because of David's sin. And it gets up to a certain point in this place that the Lord said, it's enough. We're right where you're at, this destroying angel, this killing people. He said, that's enough. Now, one thing to keep in mind I want you to think about, and you might think, well, this isn't really fair. God is not really being right here. Well, if you go back and look in Exodus 30 and verse 12, they were told to do certain things here to avoid a plague. So, God is, you have to get the whole picture of what's going on. Otherwise, you might make some false accusations against God. You need to be careful about that kind of thing. The angel of the Lord halted at the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. He's also called Araunah the Jebusite in 2 Samuel 24:16. Now David sees the angel, and he says this, 2 Samuel 24:17. Surely I have sinned, and I have done wickedly, but these sheep, what have they done? Let your hand, I pray, be against me and against my father's house. Now the Lord instructs him to build an altar. And so David goes to Ornan, and he seeks to purchase the land to construct that altar. But Ornan, he offers to give him the land. Here, I'll give you the land. I'll give you the threshing tools. You can clear it out and everything. I'll even give you the oxen for the offering. Notice what it says here, 1 Chronicles 21:23-26. But Ornan said to David, take it yourself, and let my lord the king do what is good in his eyes. Look, I have also give you the oxen for burnt offerings and threshing implements for wood, and the wheat for the grain offering. I give it all. Then King David said to Ornan, no, but I will surely buy it for the full price, for I will not take what is yours for the Lord, nor offer burnt offerings with that which cost me nothing. So David gave Ornan 600 shekels of gold by weight for the place. And David built there an altar to the Lord, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and called on the Lord, and he answered him from heaven by fire on the altar of burnt offerings. So David pays 50 shekels for the threshing floor, in 2 Samuel 24:24, and he pays 600 shekels of gold for the whole mountain. Now, interesting, you go through and you read through history and all that. This piece of land is believed to be where Solomon is going to build the temple. And some people also believe that this is the same site that Abraham offered Isaac at. So there's a lot going on with this piece of property that David has bought, and that angel being there. This is a very significant spot. But notice, going back to the idea, David said, I'm not going to offer. He's already violated the law of Moses. He's guilty. He's not going to make Ornan sacrifice so he can sacrifice. He said, no, it's going to cost me. And I'm going to do this because I'm supposed to do it. Now, what kind of things do we get out of that? Well, are we willing to rest on the efforts of others who are willing, it's easy for people to sit back and watch other people give. Are we willing to just let them? Oh, you know what? They got plenty of money coming in, and they really don't need me to give. And, when there's a need, then I'll give. Is that the way it has to work? Are we willing to count the cost and pay it? David was. Does our service to the Lord really cost us? You know, it's going to cost you to be a Christian. And I'm not just talking about money and dollars and cents. It's going to cost you. You're going to have to count the cost. There's great dividends that come from it, but you're going to have to count the cost. Also, would you classify your contribution, your offering, as sacrificial? I mean, do you give to where it hurts, so to speak? Do you do that? David gave a lot of money. Now, he's a king and he's got all his money and all that, and I understand that. But it cost him to do that. And he paid that cost. He wasn't willing to let Ornan pay the price for him. He was going to do it himself. Yeah, that's a good example for us. Are we just willing to sit by and let other people do all the work? Let other people contribute all the money? And we take the reward? Is that what we're about? Is that what we do? It's a pretty good example. The third example we'll look at is the idea the kingdom of Judah fails. Now, Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, his name means my messenger. What's going on, a little bit of historical background to this event. The kingdom of Judah was destroyed by Babylon in 586 BC. A remnant, a small group of them, were carried to Babylon. Through the unfolding events, that remnant was able to go back and rebuild the nation. They were able to rebuild the temple at 516 BC. They were able to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem by Nehemiah in 444 BC. Now, that's important to note. They were able to do all these things. They had disobeyed the Lord. Punishment came with the hand of the Babylonians. And then God allowed them to come back and be a nation again. Now, the Old Testament is viewed as being closed by Nehemiah from the historical standpoint and Malachi from the prophetic standpoint. So Nehemiah and Malachi are contemporary people. And there's problems that's going on. The corruptions of the priesthood, the failure to support the Lord's work financially, the disobedience of intermarriage with pagans and idolaters. They had serious problems. But you know what? These problems were problems of their own making because they didn't really follow the Lord. Malachi asks what some refer to as he has this sort of didactic, dialectical method, where he'll ask a question, and then he'll answer it. He'll ask a question, he'll give a counter question, and then he'll give the answer to it. Notice what it says here in Malachi 3, 8 through 10. Will a man rob God? Yet you've robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings? You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And try me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven, and pour out for you such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. Now, this is a very serious situation. Some people may say, God, how in the world can we rob you? But yet, that's what they were doing. Why? How are they doing that? Well, they weren't giving to his work, the things that he wanted them to give to. And that included the work of the priesthood, the work of the ministry, all that. They weren't doing that. It's really important that we remember that it's the Lord's money. It's the Lord's blessings. Everything we have is the Lord's. We're just stewards of it. We're going to give an account of our stewardship. And we need to be very careful of that. Every once in a while I'll hear people say something like this. They'll say, I'm not going to give. I'm not going to give because I'm going to send a message. I don't like the preacher. Or I don't like what the elders are doing. Or I don't like the direction of this congregation. So I'm just going to stop giving. And I'm going to send a message. I'd really caution you to really give that some serious thought before you do that kind of thing. Why? Because you're robbing God. You're robbing God. God instructs us to give as we have been prospered. If you're not giving as you're prospered, you're robbing God. That's a very serious challenge that you need to really give thought to. It's also interesting, he says here, Open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such a blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it? I wonder what would happen to our nation if we took God more seriously, that we took his word more seriously in our nation than we're doing right now. If we put our faith in God, would he bless us? It's hard to know our whole nation and the thoughts of it and everything, but I sort of wonder if more people are putting faith in government than they are putting it in God. The government is bankrupt, and they can only do so much for you. Think about your stewardship and what God expects you to do. There was a man by the name of Bob Spence. He's passed away. He was a good friend of ours. I would hear him say when lessons like this or points like this was being made, he'd make this statement: you cannot outgive God. He has a bigger shovel than you have. The more you shovel out, the more he's going to shovel right back in. That's a commendable attitude. That's an attitude of faith. Do we have that kind of faith? Let me ask you some questions. Are we robbing God by refusing to obey him and giving back? Have we forgotten that we are merely stewards of his blessings? Have we forgotten that we will give an account for our stewardship? Do we lack faith in God's promises? Those are questions we need to give serious thought to. So as we review, when we look at these 3 points again, the construction of the tabernacle, they were able to give. There was no shortage problem. Matter of fact, they had more, and they had to say, okay, that's too much. You've given more than is necessary. And also David, who constructs an altar. He commits this great sin, and punishment's meted out and all that. And he goes and he says, I'm not going to offer to the Lord what costs me nothing. He was willing to pay the price himself, for himself. And sometimes we forget. Sometimes we forget just all that God has given us and blessed us with. And that's what the kingdom of Judah did. They failed to remember the Lord who had redeemed them, provided for them, and gave them all these blessings. And they were actually robbing him. Giving. You know, God doesn't need anything from us. That's true. But he gives us the opportunity to be able to give to him. Think about what a blessing that is. Thanks for watching our program. Before we close our program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you, since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong turns. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the turns, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.
In this world.